Captain Jake Lawson sat at the helm of the Silverlight, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the control panel as the stars drifted quietly past the viewport. The stillness of deep space, especially this far out on the edge of Coalition territory, was usually something he welcomed. After so many years of war, patrol duty was a rare gift. A chance to breathe. A chance to pretend the galaxy was finally at peace. The mission was routine. Keep trade routes clear. Watch for any unauthorized activity. Report back. Simple. Then the alert came. A single shrill beep shattered the calm. Jake straightened instantly, his eyes locking onto the console where a blinking red icon signaled a distress call. It was faint and barely holding together, but it was real. His fingers danced over the keys, bringing up the origin. The signal came from a sector flagged as uninhabited. No traffic, no settlements, no reason for anyone to be there. Jake muttered to himself under his breath. His eyes narrowed further when he saw the encryption on the message. It was an old military code, one not used in years, long abandoned after the Coalition restructured its fleet. After a brief decryption process, the message displayed, "Slave ship down. Multiple hostiles. Need help." Jake clenched his jaw. Slavery had been outlawed in the Coalition for nearly a century, but the rumors never truly stopped. Whispers of secret syndicates, of black market flesh traders and aristocrats who still bartered in sentient lives. If this signal was real, it meant the whispers had teeth. With a grim resolve, Jake set a course for the coordinates. As the Silverlight cruised toward the planet, Jake spotted the crash site from orbit. A massive freighter, torn open like a crushed tin can, lay sprawled across the rocky terrain. Its hull was scorched and cracked, evidence of a violent descent. Jake scanned for life signs. Dozens registered faintly, scattered across the area. A few burned brighter than the rest, likely the slavers, trying to regroup. The ship descended silently, landing just outside the wreckage. Jake stepped into the dusty, wind-blasted landscape, his hand resting on the grip of the plasma rifle across his back. The air was dry and hot. Ash drifted like snow across the desolate plain. He crouched behind a twisted piece of metal debris and surveyed the wreck. Chaos. That was the only word for it. A group of armed men moved aggressively, corralling a line of captives, women from various alien species, all in shackles, some bloodied, some barely standing. Others stood defiant despite the chains around their ankles. Jake recognized the type. These weren't just pirates. They were professional traffickers. One among the captives caught his eye. A tall woman with deep violet skin and sharp eyes moved among the others, speaking with authority. Even bound, she directed the others with calm precision, urging them toward cover, trying to mount some form of resistance. Jake didn't hesitate. He activated his combat armor. The suit hummed to life around him, encasing him in a sleek shell of reinforced plating. Sensors snapped online, feeding him data on enemy positions. With his rifle raised, he surged from the shadows and opened fire. Bolts of blue energy cut through the chaos. The slavers didn't have time to react. Jake moved like a storm, calculated, fast, lethal. In minutes, the tide turned. Some of the slavers fell. Others fled into the wasteland. Not a single bolt from Jake's rifle missed its mark. The violet-skinned woman turned toward him, wary but not afraid. She studied him, her hands still bound. Jake lowered his rifle slightly. "Captain Jake Lawson of the Coalition. You're safe now." The woman shook her head. "Safe is a lie. This is only the beginning." Jake's brows lifted. "Beginning of what?" She nodded toward the horizon. There, barely visible in the heat haze, lights shimmered in the sky. "Ships, more of them. They'll come for this cargo," she said. "They always do." Jake cursed under his breath. He knew of the Malvex Syndicate, ruthless traffickers that operated like a private army. If she was right, they'd be back, and soon. "How long do we have? An hour? Maybe less." Jake scanned the surviving captives. Dozens. Too many for his small ship. They needed shelter. "We need cover. Can this planet provide it?" The woman nodded. "Name's Nyla. I was taken from a cave system a few clicks north. It's defensible." Jake adjusted the rifle on his back. "Then you lead them. I'll hold off the syndicate until you're safe." Nyla studied him for a moment, then gave a nod of acceptance. "Your funeral," she said. "Wouldn't be the first time," Jake muttered. Nyla turned and barked orders in a harsh alien tongue. The survivors began to move, limping and stumbling, but alive. Jake stood back, watching them disappear into the rocks. Then he turned toward the sky. The approaching ships were no longer distant specks. They were coming fast. Jake checked his ammo. The odds were terrible. But he had bought into worse, and he wasn't about to let slavers take another soul. He took cover behind the wreckage and waited. The syndicate had arrived. Jake crouched low behind the remains of a crumpled freighter, his eyes scanning the terrain. The syndicate ships had arrived, their engines roaring as they cut through the atmosphere, descending with military precision. The first wave landed hard, their bulky drop ships kicking up clouds of dust as they set down. Jake's mind raced. The Malvex soldiers were an elite force, well-equipped, well-trained. They weren't mercenaries, they were an extension of the Syndicate's power. Each soldier wore heavy combat armor, gleaming under the sun, and carried weapons designed for maximum lethality. Jake had faced odds before, but nothing like this. He glanced back at Nyla and the group of survivors as they made their way toward the cave entrance. There were too many of them, and only a few could be trusted to fight. It was up to him to buy them time. The first soldiers began to deploy, their boots thudding against the barren landscape. They fanned out, quickly securing a perimeter, but Jake knew he wouldn't have long. They were professionals. This wouldn't be a casual firefight. They would come for him fast. Jake's hand tightened around the grip of his rifle. He could hear the faint hum of their energy shields charging, preparing for a battle that would likely end with his blood spilled in the dust. He wasn't worried, though. The silver light wasn't far. If he could hold them off for just enough time, Neela and the others might have a chance. It was all about keeping the syndicate distracted and buying time for the women to make it to safety. A group of soldiers approached, their guns raised, eyes scanning the wreckage. Jake adjusted his position, keeping low to the ground. His heart beat in steady, controlled rhythms, syncing with the faint buzz of his combat suit's systems. He checked the energy levels in his rifle. Full charge. The soldiers were getting closer. Jake's body tensed, his senses sharpening. The first enemy soldier stepped around a pile of debris, his rifle aimed directly at Jake's position. The man's helmet reflected the sunlight, a clear target. Jake didn't hesitate. His finger tightened on the trigger. A plasma bolt streaked through the air, hitting the soldier square in the chest. The shot was precise, a clean hit that sent the man crashing to the ground. The rest of the squad reacted instantly, moving into position. Jake dashed to a new cover point, ducking behind a large sheet of twisted metal. The first soldier was down, but there were many more, and they were not going to give him a second to breathe. He fired again, a barrage of plasma bolts lighting up the air. The enemy soldiers took cover behind wreckage and vehicles, returning fire. The landscape lit up with bursts of energy as Jake moved, dodging blasts, staying unpredictable. But the syndicate wasn't backing down. They moved in with disciplined precision, advancing in tight formation, their guns cutting through the air with deadly accuracy. Jake darted between piles of wreckage, staying low, his combat suit's cloaking system kicking in just enough to reduce his visibility. He popped out from behind a large rock, firing a shot that took down another soldier. He heard the unmistakable whir of a grenade launcher charging up. The enemy was getting smarter. Jake didn't wait to find out. He moved again, rolling behind a chunk of debris, narrowly avoiding the explosion that rocked the ground beneath him. The blast sent shards of metal flying, some grazing his armor, but he was still standing. The syndicate soldiers began advancing faster now, taking note of his positions, trying to box him in. Jake knew this fight couldn't be won by sheer firepower alone. He needed to outthink them, outmaneuver them. And with Nyla leading the group of freed captives, time was running out. Through the dust and smoke, he spotted her, a glimpse of violet skin, moving with the others toward the caves. Nyla had reached the cave entrance, with most of the women following her. They were safe for now, but Jake still needed to cover their retreat. He tapped a few buttons on his combat suit's control panel, switching his rifle to grenade mode. It was a long shot, but the enemy had to be spread thin by now. If he could get them all to cluster, he'd have a chance at taking out a few more. Jake crept along the side of the wreckage, positioning himself behind a fuel cell. He took aim at a group of soldiers that had just rounded the corner. The grenade launcher hummed as he fired, sending the projectile toward the fuel cell. The explosion was deafening. A massive fireball erupted into the air, sending syndicate soldiers flying in all directions. Jake surged forward, taking advantage of the chaos. His rifle fired rapidly, disintegrating enemy soldiers before they could regroup. But even as the smoke cleared, Jake knew they wouldn't stop. They were here for one thing: to finish what they'd started. More syndicate reinforcements were arriving, and the situation was spiraling fast. He had to fall back. He couldn't hold them off forever. "Nyla!" Jake shouted over his comms, his voice barely audible over the firefight. "Get them to the caves, now!" Nyla didn't need to be told twice. She'd been organizing her people, and now, with the threat closer than ever, she led them toward the cave system. But as Jake looked toward the horizon, he saw the true threat: the arrival of a Malvec assault mech. The mech's silhouette loomed large, towering over the battlefield. It was a walking tank, heavily armored and armed with plasma cannons that could level a building in seconds. This was the Syndicate's trump card, and they had just deployed it. Jake's heart pounded. He had one shot to bring it down before it could turn the entire area into a charred wasteland. The mech's cannons began to hum with energy. It was about to fire. "Think fast, Jake." He scanned the wreckage around him. There had to be something, anything that could take down the machine. And then he saw it: a weapons crate half buried under debris. It was a long shot, but if it contained what he thought it did, he might just have a chance. Jake sprinted toward the crate, dodging enemy fire as he went. He reached it, ripped the crate open, and smiled. Inside was exactly what he needed: an anti-armor rocket launcher, still fully loaded. It was a long shot, but Jake had never been one to shy away from taking risks. The mech fired, its cannon blasting a hole through the ground just inches from Jake. He barely managed to evade the shot, diving behind cover, and pulled the rocket launcher from its case. His suit calculated the trajectory. There was no room for error. Jake steadied his breath, aimed, and fired. The rocket flew true, striking the mech's weak spot, a joint between its legs and torso. The explosion sent the massive machine staggering, sparks flying from its broken systems. With a final deafening crash, the mech collapsed to the ground, a heap of twisted metal and sparks. The Syndicate soldiers faltered. Their most powerful asset was down. But Jake knew this was just the beginning. He was about to run out of time, and the Syndicate had more forces on the way. "Nyla," he said, his voice urgent, "move the survivors. I'll hold them off. I'll catch up with you." "We'll be waiting," she replied. Jake turned back to the battlefield. The Syndicate had just been dealt a blow, but they weren't finished. Neither was he. The cavern mouth rose like a jagged wound in the cliffs, dark and wide enough for two people to walk side by side. Jake arrived just behind the group, sweat clinging to his skin, armor scorched and pitted from near misses. His side throbbed where shrapnel had torn through a seam, but he was alive, and so were the survivors. Inside, the air was damp and heavy. Shadows danced across the rough stone walls as the last rays of sunlight faded behind them. Jake took one final look at the horizon. In the distance, the Syndicate's forces were regrouping. They wouldn't stop now. Not after the mech was destroyed. Not after losing so many soldiers. Jake turned and followed Nyla into the darkness. The interior of the caves stretched deeper than he expected, a twisting network of tunnels and chambers carved by time and tectonics. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw how Nyla had organized the survivors. Groups of them clustered in defensible pockets, alien women of all shapes and colors, battered but holding together. Jake crouched by the entrance, checking the motion sensors on his suit. His display was lighting up. Syndicate ships were landing. Boots were hitting the ground. They were coming. He glanced back. Most of the freed captives were barely able to stand, let alone fight. But some had grit. Some had fire. Neela stood at their center, plasma pistol clutched tightly, her sharp eyes burning in the darkness. Jake addressed them all. "We hold here. They'll come fast and they'll come hard. But this choke point works in our favor. They have numbers. We have stone. And resolve." Nyla stepped forward, nodding. "We seal the side tunnels. Barricade the small ones. Force them through this main path. Make them fight on our terms. Jake wasted no time. With a few of the stronger survivors, including a towering alien woman built like a wall, they dragged debris and rocks to block the narrower tunnels. Old pieces of wreckage and broken crates were stacked up as makeshift barricades. They improvised traps, tripwires using cable scraps, explosives made from broken ammo cells. Jake knew it wouldn't stop the syndicate, but it would slow them down, and every second counted. Outside, the sky darkened with dropships. Jake could hear the rumble of heavy machinery. They had brought more walkers, maybe even another mech. But he didn't care. He stood near the cave entrance, Nyla by his side, both armed, both ready. When the first syndicate soldier appeared at the cave mouth, Jake raised his hand. Not yet. Let them come in. Let them all get caught in the kill box. 6 soldiers entered, then 8. More behind them. Now Jake fired. His first shot hit the lead soldier center mass. Nyla's pistol lit up the cave with sharp bursts. The soldiers scrambled for cover, caught in a hail of plasma fire. The rocky tunnel amplified the noise into a deafening roar. Then came the return fire. Blinding bolts of energy lit up the dark. Chunks of rock exploded, sending shards flying. Jake ducked and fired again, moving from cover to cover. Nyla moved like lightning, her blade slicing through a soldier that got too close. The rest of the survivors followed suit, clumsy but fierce. Jake took a hit to the shoulder. His suit absorbed most of it, but the force knocked him into a wall. He shook it off and kept firing. They pushed back the first wave. Bodies fell. Smoke filled the cave. Then came the next wave, and this time they brought a mech. The machine forced its way into the mouth of the tunnel, too wide for a full entry, but its arms extended forward, plasma cannons charging. The air grew hot. Sparks flew as its weapons fired into the cave walls, vaporizing stone and blasting barricades apart. Jake pulled Nyla down just in time as a blast scorched the air above them. "We can't take it head on," Nyla shouted, her voice strained. Jake scanned the ceiling. His eyes caught something. High up, a natural fissure. A crack in the rock. If they brought the ceiling down, the mech would be buried. Maybe the soldiers too. "Cover me," Jake said as he grabbed the last of their explosives. He sprinted through the cave, dodging blasts and rubble. The ground shook with every shot from the mech. Jake reached the base of the fissure, climbing a narrow ledge. He planted the charges quickly, setting the timer with shaking fingers. "Fall back," he shouted. "Get everyone back." The countdown began. Jake ran for his life, diving behind a rock as the charges exploded. The ceiling gave way. Stone crashed down like a tidal wave. Dust and debris filled the air. The mech didn't stand a chance. Buried, crushed. The explosion echoed like thunder. When the dust cleared, silence followed. Bodies were scattered. The cave mouth was sealed with rubble. Jake stood slowly, breathing hard. Blood trickled from his arm. But they had survived. Nyla approached, her face streaked with grime, but her eyes were steady. "That was insane," she said. "Had to be done," Jake replied, wincing. "They'll send more," Nyla said. "Then we get ready," Jake answered. They moved deeper into the cave, regrouping with the others. Supplies were low, weapons fewer, but spirits, surprisingly, were high. They had beaten back the syndicate twice now. That meant something. Jake sat against a boulder, catching his breath. Nyla sat beside him. "We lost some back there," she said quietly. "We saved more," Jake replied. "But this isn't over." "No, it's not," Nyla agreed. The ground above them rumbled again. Another wave was coming. They wouldn't have long. Jake stood, steadying himself. Time to move. The cave trembled beneath the rumble of engines outside. Jake stood with his back to the stone wall, feeling every vibration in his bones. The syndicate wasn't giving up. That much was clear. And with every passing moment, more of their forces landed on the surface. Nyla stepped up beside him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Behind them, the freed captives huddled in silence. Some whispered in alien tongues. Others tended to wounds. They had fought and survived, but hope was running thin. Jake activated his wrist comm and ran a quick scan of the surrounding space. It was a long shot, but if there was any coalition activity nearby, it might be their only chance at real backup. He watched as the scanner blinked. Seconds passed. Then it beeped. A signal. Faint, but real. Jake stood quickly, a mix of urgency and hope flashing through him. A ship was heading their way. He and Nyla climbed up to a narrow ridge above the cave, where the view stretched across the rocky plain. In the distance, a sleek vessel skimmed low across the terrain. Its hull shimmered, reflecting the dull glow of the distant sun. Nyla squinted at it, her hand resting on the grip of her pistol. Syndicate? Jake shook his head. Not their design. This is something else. The ship landed a few hundred meters away, its engines kicking up a plume of dust. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the side hatch opened with a hiss, and a single figure stepped out. The being was tall, humanoid, with chrome-like skin that caught the light like liquid metal. Its movements were smooth, its posture non-threatening. Jake recognized the species instantly. Drexians, known for their advanced tech and tendency to stay neutral in conflicts, neither ally nor enemy to the coalition. But they were powerful. The Drexian approached with empty hands raised, a sign of peace. Jake stepped forward cautiously. What do you want? The Drexian's voice was calm, almost melodic. My name is Kieran. I intercepted your distress signal. The Syndicate's actions have gone too far. We may have a common enemy. Jake didn't lower his guard. We're not looking to be pawns in someone else's game. Kieran nodded slowly. I don't play games. I have been gathering intelligence on the Syndicate for years, but information means nothing without strength. That's what you have. Strength, will, and now, leverage. Neela joined Jake, her gaze sharp. And what exactly do you want in return? Kieran looked between them. I want to take them down. Not just this group. All of them. Their network. Their buyers. Their leaders. I have data, ships, access to resources, but I need people willing to fight. Jake exchanged a glance with Nyla. The offer was tempting. Too tempting. But trust didn't come easy. Not out here. What's your plan? Kieran motioned toward his ship. This vessel is small, but I have a larger one in orbit. It's armed, cloaked, and capable of extraction. I can get your people off this planet. Once aboard, we can plan our next move. Together. Nyla's jaw clenched. Why now? Why us? Because you succeeded where many others failed, Kieran replied. You wounded them. That matters. Jake thought it over. They were out of options. Trapped. Outgunned. And more Syndicate forces would arrive soon. All right, we'll hear your plan. They returned to the caves quickly. The survivors were gathered and briefed. Not everyone trusted the Drexian, but the alternative was worse. Within minutes, they were ready to move. Nyla and Jake took the lead, guiding the group across the jagged terrain toward Kieran's ship. The boarding ramp lowered with a mechanical hiss. Jake herded the last group up just as plasma blasts lit up the ridge behind them. Syndicate scouts had spotted them. Move! Kieran raced to the controls as the ship's hatch sealed shut. The engines roared. The ship shot upward, narrowly avoiding a volley of fire from the ground below. Jake held onto a railing as the craft climbed into the sky. They breached the atmosphere seconds later. Through the viewport, a sleek vessel hovered in orbit. Kieran's flagship. He docked the smaller ship, and the hatch opened to a metallic corridor filled with soft light and the hum of advanced tech. Jake stepped out, stunned by the contrast. After days of blood and dust, the pristine interior felt unreal. Kieran led them through the corridors to a central war room. Holographic displays lit up around them, showing star systems, planetary routes, and red-marked zones. The Syndicate's network, Kieran explained. Processing centers, transport routes, safe havens. I know where they are, and I know how to hurt them. Jake folded his arms. So what's the first target? Kieran pointed to a planet highlighted in red. It's a transfer point, a hub for moving slaves from captured ships to private buyers. If we take it down, we cripple their logistics. Nyla's voice was low but steady. You're sure? As sure as I can be. Jake stepped closer to the map. The plan was dangerous. The Syndicate would be heavily fortified there. But if it worked, it would send a message. We go in fast, Jake said. Hit hard. No room for error. Kieran nodded. I've already sent scouts. Their outer defenses can be breached. I'll handle the tech. You lead the assault. Nyla turned to Jake. If we do this, we finish it. Jake didn't blink. Then let's finish it. The sleek Drexian vessel cut through space like a blade, quiet and unseen. Inside the command deck, Jake stood at the front viewport, arms crossed, watching the target planet grow larger on the display. Massive facilities covered the surface like tumors, fortresses of steel where thousands of sentient lives had been sorted, broken, and sold. Nyla joined him, her eyes locked on the grim surface below. This was where the syndicate processed their captives before auctioning them to the highest bidder. She didn't need to speak. Her rage simmered in silence. Kieran's voice came through the overhead system. We'll reach the perimeter in 90 seconds. Their automated systems will scan for threats, but I've already corrupted their sensor protocols. You'll have 5 minutes to breach before they realize something's wrong. Jake nodded. He and Nyla had already briefed the strike team. Fighters formed from the very captives who had escaped the crash. They were raw but committed. Pain had forged them. Purpose now drove them. They moved to the ship's armory. Jake strapped on a reinforced tactical vest, checked his rifle, and holstered a sidearm. Nyla pulled her hair back, fastening the clasp of her light armor. She grabbed her blade and a plasma pistol. Her face was set like stone. No one spoke. No one needed to. The smaller assault shuttle waited in the launch bay. It was fast, quiet, and designed for close-range infiltration. Jake boarded first. The team followed, each one gripping a weapon with trembling resolve. The shuttle detached and dropped into the atmosphere like a falling star, its hull burning as it cut through the air. The facility's towers loomed in the distance, shielded by wall-mounted cannons and automated defense drones. But Kieran's interference gave them a narrow window. The shuttle slid low, invisible to sensors, and landed in a service corridor between two massive towers. The ramp dropped. Jake and Nyla led the charge. They moved through the narrow corridor in silence, dispatching two surprise guards with quick, clean shots. The strike team fanned out, sticking to walls, ducking under pipes and conduits. Inside the fortress, the air was hot and oppressive, humming with machinery. Jake pointed ahead. Control room is the priority. Take it and we shut them down from the inside. Nyla nodded and signaled two others to split off. Their task, free the captives. They reached a blast door with thick security panels. One of the rescued aliens, Ro, a tech specialist, rushed forward and pulled open a toolkit. Her nimble fingers danced across the keypad. Sparks flew. The door creaked open just as warning klaxons began to blare. They know we're here, Ro shouted. We're in, Jake said. Go loud. Inside, the facility roared to life. Red lights flashed. Alarm bells echoed through the corridors. Guards scrambled from rooms, weapons drawn. Jake was ready. He opened fire, dropping the first soldier before he could even aim. Nyla moved like a shadow, slicing through the line and disappearing behind a support pillar before re-emerging with her pistol raised. They fought their way down corridor after corridor, clearing room after room. The team advanced with ruthless coordination. Despite limited training, each survivor fought like their life depended on it, because it did. Jake ducked a plasma bolt that scorched the wall behind him. He fired back and struck his target. Then he kicked open a door and found himself face to face with a syndicate officer seated at a control terminal. The officer froze. Jake leveled his rifle, shut it all down. Now the officer hesitated, then reached forward and began inputting commands. The sound of locks disengaging echoed over the comms. Nyla's voice came through. Pens are opening. Slaves are moving. Jake's eyes didn't leave the officer. Any traps? The officer shook his head. Good. Jake stunned him with a shot to the shoulder and turned to the team. We've got control. Move the freed captives to the docking base. Ro's voice crackled over the comm. There's more inbound. Drop ships closing in fast. Reinforcements. Jake's jaw tightened. Get them out. We'll hold the perimeter. The freed captives poured into the central corridor, guided by the remaining strike team. Many still bore the bruises and chains of slavery, but there was strength in their movement. Hope. For the first time, they were taking their freedom back by force. Jake stood near the main gates, flanked by Nyla and two of their strongest fighters. He watched the monitors. The syndicate was coming. Hard. Ro's voice came again. 2 minutes until final shuttle launch. After that, we're on our own. Then we make 2 minutes count, Jake replied. The facility shook with the impact of enemy fire. Explosions tore through outer barricades. Jake crouched, aimed, and waited. The first wave came like a flood. Syndicate soldiers stormed the corridor, weapons blazing. Jake fired in bursts, dropping them one after another. Nyla moved like a viper, striking with speed and brutality. The air filled with the deafening symphony of combat, plasma fire, shouted commands, the screams of the dying. One of the defenders fell. Another was wounded. Still they held. The freed captives continued to board the last shuttle. Kieran, monitoring from orbit, counted down over the comms. Final launch in 60 seconds. Jake ducked as a blast hit the ceiling above, showering them with debris. He rolled, aimed, and took down another wave. His arms ached, his lungs burned. But he didn't stop. Behind him, Nyla screamed as she threw a blade into a syndicate commander's chest. The fight was far from over. Jake could hear the massive footsteps of walkers approaching outside. The syndicate had deployed armor. Kieran's voice came back through the comms. "Shuttle lifting off now. You need to move." Jake didn't hesitate. "Fall back. We regroup at the bay." They ran through the smoke-filled corridors, syndicate fire nipping at their heels. The walls crumbled around them, and flames licked through broken pipes. They reached the hangar just as the shuttle lifted off. The remaining fighters turned to defend the exit, but the syndicate was already breaking through. "We need to destroy this place," Jake shouted. "It ends here." He pulled the remote detonator from his belt. They had rigged explosives in the command room before breaching the slave pens. The timer was linked. One push would bring the entire facility down. Nyla met his eyes. "Do it." Jake activated the trigger. They sprinted for the emergency lift, the floor shaking beneath their feet. Behind them, the sounds of battle fell silent. Then the world exploded. A chain of detonations tore through the processing center. Fire consumed the corridors. Walls buckled. Towers collapsed. From orbit, the facility imploded, reduced to rubble. The final resistance shuttle raced away from the surface, trailing smoke and debris. Inside, Jake leaned against a wall, his face bruised, his arm bleeding, but alive. Kieran appeared on a hollow panel. "You did it. The syndicate won't recover from this." Jake didn't respond right away. He looked around at the survivors, at Nyla, who stood watching the burning world fall away beneath them. "This is just the start," Jake finally said. "We hit them once. Now we finish it." The syndicate's processing facility was gone, reduced to a smoldering wound in the surface of the planet. From high orbit, it looked like a crater carved by divine judgment. Jake watched it shrink through the viewport of Kieran's flagship, his face lit by the dim red glow of distant stars. He leaned against the wall in silence. His armor was scorched and dented. His body ached, but his mind was clear. Nyla stood beside him, arms crossed, her violet skin marked with scrapes and burns. She didn't speak either. They didn't need to. They had won, but it hadn't come without a cost. In the med bay, Roe tended to the wounded. Others rested in the quiet hum of the ship's lower decks. Former captives, now survivors, trying to make sense of their freedom. Some cried, some sat quietly, others stared at the stars like they had never really seen them before. Kieran entered the bridge, his chrome-like skin reflecting soft blue light. He approached slowly, as if aware of the weight in the room. "You did what most would not even dare," he said. "You struck them at the root." Jake looked up, his voice low. "We hit one hub. They'll have more." Kieran nodded. "Yes, but this was their core, a central artery. They have other locations, but without this one, their system fractures. Their command will scatter. Their profits vanish. You cost them something they cannot easily replace." Jake walked toward the command table. A large hollow map shimmered to life, displaying red highlighted stars and moon bases marked with syndicate tags. The scale of it all made his stomach twist. They had been operating everywhere, under the noses of governments, military sectors, even neutral worlds. He turned to Nyla. "You still want to fight?" Nyla gave a quiet nod. "As long as they're still hunting the innocent, yes." Jake rested his hands on the edge of the console. "Then we keep going." Not as soldiers, not as revenge, but as a warning. Kieran gestured toward one of the larger red-marked worlds. We already have intel from the raid. Their ledgers, coordinates of buyers, transports, trade partners. You've opened a door. Jake leaned closer. So we walked through it. They spent the next few days aboard Kieran's ship. Repairs were made. The injured stabilized. Training began for those willing to keep fighting. Some would be relocated to safer sectors, but many chose to stay. Neela emerged as a leader among the survivors, calm, decisive, and unwavering. Her voice carried weight not just because she had survived, but because she had fought, bled, and led. Jake spoke little. He observed. He planned. His thoughts often drifted to the wreckage they had left behind, the lives they couldn't save, and the ones still trapped in unknown corners of the galaxy. On the fifth day, they gathered in the central hall, a quiet assembly, survivors, fighters, engineers, rebels now, in spirit if not in name. Jake stood before them. You all know what we're up against. This isn't just a war against ships and soldiers. It's a war against something older, deeper. The idea that some lives are worth less than others. That freedom is a privilege to be sold. He paused, scanning their faces. They believe fear will silence us, that power will protect them. But they're wrong. He took a breath. We are not an army. We're a storm, and we're coming for them. The room remained silent for a moment. Then came a voice, then two, then a wave of applause. Not loud, not wild, just steady, full of promise. Later that night, Jake returned to the observation deck. Alone now, he stared at the stars. Each point of light was a system, a world, a place the syndicate could be hiding. Nyla stepped in quietly, standing beside him. You meant what you said in there? Jake nodded. Every word. What happens if we lose? Jake didn't answer right away. Then we make sure we fall loud enough that no one forgets we stood. The stars stretched out before them. Endless, cold, beautiful, full of danger and promise alike. And Jake Lawson, once a quiet patrol captain, now bore the burden of something far greater. Not just survival, not just vengeance. A movement, a mission. He watched the stars, and somewhere out there, the syndicate watched back. But this time, they would know who was coming.